Business Essentials Podcast. Unlock your career.
Learn to speak business English like a pro.
Ever watch a perfectly good deal just evaporate right at the finish line? Today we're getting into storytelling for business, specifically the story structure that closes deals. Because turning facts into stories isn't just creative writing. It's the difference between winning and losing. And if you're working on your business English, stick around. The phrases Sarah's about to share are the exact ones that close real deals in real boardrooms. Sarah, so glad you're here. What's going on that makes so many promising deals just fall apart right when they should be closing?
Good to be back, Marcus. Look, most people don't realize this, but only 29% of B2B sales opportunities actually close into customers. That means 71% of engaged prospects, people who are genuinely interested, end up walking away. And here's why. Most sales teams are still trying to close deals using facts, features, and pure logic. But neuroscience shows us something completely different. The human brain doesn't make decisions based on data. It makes decisions based on stories.
Hold on. So people are literally tuning out the data?
Not exactly tuning it out. They're just not connecting with it on an emotional level. Let me put this into perspective. Research shows that people are 22 times more likely to remember a story than facts alone. So when you're presenting ROI calculations and feature lists, your prospect forgets 95% of it within 24 hours. But when you tell them a story about how your solution transformed another customer's situation, they remember it for months.
22 times? That's a huge gap.
It is. And companies that strategically use storytelling in their sales conversations see measurable improvements of 20% or higher in their close rates. This isn't soft skills. This is hard business outcomes.
For our listeners learning English, what does close rate mean?
Good question. Close rate is the percentage of sales opportunities that actually convert into paying customers. So if you have 10 qualified prospects and you close 3 of them, your close rate is 30%. In business English, you'll hear people say, improve our close rate, increase conversion, or boost win rates. They all mean getting more prospects to become customers.
So it's a key metric for sales teams.
Absolutely. It's one of the most important metrics because it directly impacts revenue. You can have all the leads in the world, but if you can't close them, you don't have a business.
Okay, so tell me, what's actually happening in the brain when someone hears a story versus when they hear data?
So this is fascinating. When your brain hears facts and figures, like our software reduces processing time by 40%, only your language processing centers activate. You're just decoding words. But when you hear a story with sensory detail, emotional texture, and a narrative arc, your entire brain lights up. Vision areas, motor cortex, sensory cortex, memory centers, everything activates.
So it's like the difference between reading a manual and watching a movie?
Exactly. And here's the key part. When your brain is completely absorbed in a story, something called narrative transportation happens. Your critical thinking brain, the part that generates objections and skepticism, essentially goes offline. All your mental resources are occupied with following the plot, empathizing with characters, visualizing scenes. There's no bandwidth left for generating objections.
Wait, so stories literally bypass the skeptical brain?
They do. And that's not manipulation. That's just how human cognition works. Your analytical mind has gone silent while listening to a story, which is precisely the state you want your prospect in during a closing conversation.
That's a good phrase. Bypass the skeptical brain. How would you use that in a sales meeting?
You might explain to your team, when we tell customer success stories, we're not just providing examples. We're bypassing the prospect's skeptical brain and creating emotional engagement. Or you might say, facts trigger analysis, stories trigger connection. It's about understanding that different types of information activate different mental states.
Got it. So what's the biggest mistake sales reps make when they try to use stories?
The number one mistake is telling stories about your company instead of about your customer. They say things like, "Let me tell you about how we got started. Back in 2008, our founder noticed a gap in the market. We've since grown to 500 employees and serve customers in 47 countries."
And that's wrong?
Completely wrong. Because your prospect stops listening. You've positioned your company as the hero, and your prospect is just a passive onlooker. Studies show that self-focused narratives trigger skepticism and disengagement.
So what should they do instead?
You tell a story where the customer is the hero, not your company. You'd say something like, "I worked with a VP of operations at a mid-sized logistics firm last year who was facing a specific challenge you might recognize. Their team was buried in manual data entry, accuracy was suffering, and they were actually considering replacing their entire system, not because it was broken, but because it was consuming so much time that they couldn't focus on strategic work."
Oh, so the prospect sees themselves in that story.
Exactly. The prospect is the implied hero. Your customer is an example of how the hero's journey can unfold, and your solution is the guide that helps them succeed. Engagement increases dramatically when you frame it this way,
That's so different from how most people pitch.
right? And the data backs this up. Companies that position customers as heroes in their stories and their brand as the guide see conversion rate improvements up to 30% compared to brand hero narratives. Sales reps trained to tell customer hero stories instead of company hero stories see close rate improvements of 15 to 25% within the first quarter.
That's huge. What's another big mistake?
Forgetting to include the struggle. Only talking about success. People say things like, "We have a customer in your industry who's doing amazing things. They implemented our solution and now everything's perfect. They're happy, their team's happy, revenue is up."
And that's a problem because...
Because your prospect doesn't believe you. Real business stories aren't perfect. When you leave out the struggle, they suspect you're cherry-picking the easiest success story. The absence of struggle signals inauthenticity, and trust deteriorates.
So they need to hear the challenges.
Absolutely. You'd say something like, "I worked with a VP of operations at a logistics company who faced a legitimate concern about data security. Initially, they were hesitant because they'd had a bad experience with a different software vendor. The vendor overpromised and under-delivered on security. So when I pitched our solution, they were skeptical, and rightfully so. Here's what we did differently."
Oh, so you're acknowledging their objections up front.
Exactly. By acknowledging real hesitation and the prospect's legitimate concern, you signal authenticity. The story becomes believable because it includes resistance. When you then explain how those concerns were addressed, the resolution feels earned and credible.
So the struggle makes the success more believable?
Completely. Stories without struggle lack tension. The human brain is wired to pay attention to conflict and resolution. Stories without conflict don't activate the engagement centers of the brain. They just sound like marketing fluff.
Can you give me an example of how this would work in a real closing conversation?
Sure. Let me paint a picture. Imagine you're on a closing call with a manufacturing company. They're concerned about implementation risk. They've been burned before by software that didn't integrate with their legacy systems. Instead of defending your solution immediately, you tell them a story.
What would that sound like?
You'd say, "I completely understand that concern. I worked with a manufacturing firm, similar revenue scale, similar team structure, who had the exact same worry. They'd invested in a system 2 years earlier that promised seamless integration, but ended up creating more problems than it solved. So when they talked to us, they were extremely skeptical. What changed their mind wasn't our assurances. It was seeing a proof of concept with their actual data. We spent 2 weeks building a limited integration prototype using their real systems. That demonstration showed them it would work without disrupting operations. 6 months later, they'd cut their data processing time by 35% and passed a compliance audit without requiring any additional manual review.
So you're telling them about someone who had the same concern and overcame it.
Exactly. And now, instead of you trying to talk them out of their concern, they're seeing a path forward modeled by someone like them. Stories that explicitly reference the prospect's stated concerns see 45% higher influence on buying decisions compared to generic customer stories.
That's powerful. So, what's the framework? How should someone structure their closing story?
So I use what I call the 5-phase story structure. Phase 1 is the setup. You establish credibility and relevance through what we call peer proof. You reference a specific customer in the same or similar industry facing a similar challenge. You mention them by context, not name. Something like, a VP of operations at a mid-sized manufacturing company. You establish relevance without going into full story mode, just 2 to 3 sentences that signal, I work with people like you.
So, you're building credibility first.
Yes, the opening moments of a closing conversation determine whether your prospect is in a receptive or skeptical state of mind. This phase creates what researchers call peer trust, the conviction that your solution has worked for someone like them.
What's phase 2?
Phase 2 is problem magnification. Before your prospect will choose to take action, they need to genuinely feel the pain of their current situation. This isn't emotional manipulation. It's helping them see what they might not be seeing. You describe what your customer was experiencing before they took action, not just the surface problem, but the emotional and business consequences.
For our listeners learning English, what does magnification mean in this context?
Great question. Magnification means making something appear larger or more significant, like looking through a magnifying glass. In storytelling, problem magnification means helping your prospect truly understand and feel the full impact of the problem. You're not exaggerating. You're making visible what was hidden. In business English, you might say magnify the issue, amplify the concern, or bring the problem into focus.
So, you're helping them see the real cost.
Exactly. You use specific sensory language. You include the impact: wasted time, missed opportunities, team frustration, lost revenue, stress. You make it relatable by showing how the problem was affecting real people on their team.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, you'd say something like, what they described to me was interesting. On the surface, the problem was that they had 4 systems that weren't talking to each other. But the real impact was this. Every Friday, their operations manager, sharp guy, really strategic thinker, was spending 6 hours manually pulling data from 4 different databases and consolidating it into a spreadsheet. 6 hours every Friday. That was time he couldn't spend on process improvements, supplier negotiations, or strategy. His team could see it too. He was frustrated, they were frustrated. Beyond that specific manager, the data fragmentation meant they were missing visibility into supply chain problems. They'd sometimes discover issues after they'd already impacted production.
So, you're making the pain visceral.
Correct. Most companies don't realize how much organizational potential gets locked up in manual processes and system fragmentation. It's not just about time. It's about what's not happening because your best people are stuck in operational firefighting instead of driving strategy.
That's really powerful. What's phase 3?
Phase 3 is the turning point. This is where you shift from problem to possibility. You introduce the moment when your customer decided to take action and what happened in the early stages. This phase is crucial because it shows that the decision was made despite uncertainty. Your customer didn't have perfect information, but they decided to move forward anyway. This gives your prospect permission to do the same.
So, you're showing them it's okay to take a risk.
Exactly. You describe the decision point. What made them decide to take action despite the risk and uncertainty? You include what they were afraid of or concerned about at that moment. You show that the early stages of implementation had challenges or required adjustment. And you introduce the initial results, not the final outcomes, but the first wins they saw.
So, it's realistic, not perfect?
Right. You'd say, so at that point, they had to make a decision. They could continue with the status quo, or they could invest in a solution that would integrate these systems. The decision wasn't easy. They were concerned about implementation disruption, learning curve for the team, data integrity during the transition. But their leadership team recognized that doing nothing actually had a higher cost than taking action. So they made the decision to move forward.
And then you show the early results?
Exactly. What's interesting is what happened in the first month. The transition wasn't perfectly smooth. There were questions, there was learning. Some team members needed extra support with the new interfaces. But within the first 30 days, they were already seeing something unexpected. That Friday data consolidation process started dropping from 6 hours to about 3.5 hours, even before the system was fully optimized. The team could see light at the end of the tunnel.
So you're showing progress, even with challenges.
Right. That early win actually accelerated adoption because people started believing it would work. It gives your prospect confidence that even if there are bumps, the direction is right.
What's phase 4?
Phase 4 is the transformation. This is the peak moment, the emotional and business culmination of the story. This is where what we call mirror neurons fire strongest in your prospect's brain. Mirror neurons are brain cells that activate both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing that same action. When you tell a prospect a story about how your solution helped another customer achieve success, mirror neurons fire in the prospect's brain, as if they themselves were experiencing that success.
Wait, so their brain is actually experiencing the success?
In a way, yes. The prospect's brain literally mimics the neural patterns that would occur if they were the hero of your story. So when a character in your narrative experiences satisfaction from using your solution, mirror neurons fire in your prospect's brain as if they were having that experience themselves. This is neurologically different from how prospects process logical arguments. Facts require conscious evaluation, while mirror neuron activation happens automatically and unconsciously.
That's incredible. So how do you craft this phase?
You lead with the business outcomes, specific numbers, time frames, measurable improvements. Then you immediately follow with the emotional or organizational transformation, how the team feels differently, what they can now focus on, how their strategic capability changed. You connect the outcomes back to the original problem, and you make it aspirational.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, you'd say, by month 3, that 6-hour Friday process had dropped to 45 minutes. That's not incremental improvement, that's transformational. They went from losing an entire afternoon every week to having their operations manager focused on strategic work. But here's what mattered more. The data visibility changed everything. Because they could now see their supply chain in real time, they started catching potential problems early. In the first 6 months, they identified 3 potential disruptions they would have missed with the old system. Prevented costs in the range of $200,000 or more. But the real shift was intangible. Their operations team went from feeling like they were constantly fighting fires to feeling like they were actually running the operations strategically. The team felt empowered. When we talked to them 6 months in, the operations manager said something that stuck with me. We finally have time to think. That's the transformation. They went from managing the problem to optimizing the opportunity.
So you're combining hard numbers with emotional impact?
Exactly. Research shows prospects remember the emotional transformation longer than they remember the statistics. But the statistics give credibility to the emotional transformation. You need both.
What's phase 5?
Phase 5 is the resolution and forward commitment. This is the end moment that's critical to memory formation and decision-making. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman discovered that people don't evaluate experiences by averaging every moment. Instead, they compress experiences into a highlight reel built around 2 moments: the peak, which we just talked about, and the end.
So the ending is just as important as the peak?
Just as important. A weak or rushed ending destroys momentum and leaves a hollow, uncertain impression, despite an otherwise strong conversation. So you need to explicitly summarize the key insight from the story and how it relates to their situation. You acknowledge what makes their situation similar to and different from your customer's situation. You ask clarifying questions about their timeline and decision-making process, and you outline clear, specific next steps with deadlines and accountability.
So you're creating a clear path forward?
Exactly. You'd say something like, "So here's what I want to highlight. The company we talked about faced the same core challenge you mentioned: system fragmentation and lost productivity in strategic functions. They were concerned about implementation risk. They were skeptical it would work with their legacy systems. They decided to move forward anyway, and within 6 months, they'd fundamentally changed how their operations function operates. Now, your situation isn't identical. Your team structure is different, your complexity is different, but the core opportunity is the same: unlocking your team's strategic potential by solving the integration problem."
And then you ask about their specific concerns?
Right. What I'm curious about, based on what you've heard, does the timeline they experienced, meaningful improvements within 30 days, substantial transformation within 6 months, does that feel realistic for your organization? You're inviting dialogue, not pushing for a close.
That's a good phrase. Forward commitment. How would you use that in a real business context?
You might say, "We need forward commitment from both sides, clear next steps and mutual accountability." Or in a team setting, "Let's establish forward commitment. Who's doing what by when?" It's about creating clarity and shared responsibility for moving things forward. In sales, it means getting the prospect to commit to specific next actions, not just vague interest.
So native speakers would say forward commitment instead of just next steps?
Next steps is fine and very common. Forward commitment is more specific. It implies mutual accountability and concrete action. Both are good, but forward commitment signals a higher level of seriousness and shared responsibility.
Before we wrap up, let's recap the key terms we talked about today.
Sure. The main ones were close rate, narrative transportation, magnification, mirror neurons, and forward commitment. Close rate is the percentage of sales opportunities that convert into paying customers. Narrative transportation is when stories hijack your consciousness so completely that your skeptical brain goes offline. Magnification means helping prospects see and feel the full impact of a problem. Mirror neurons are brain cells that fire when you observe someone else's experience as if you're experiencing it yourself. And forward commitment means creating clear next steps with mutual accountability.
Great. So our listeners can use these terms when they're preparing sales presentations, coaching their teams, or analyzing why certain deals closed and others didn't.
Exactly. And remember, 75% of B2B buyers rank trust as the most important factor in supplier selection. Stories are the most effective mechanism for building trust faster than any other communication method.
So Sarah, what's the one thing you want people to take from this?
Every closing conversation should include at least one customer success story structured with these 5 phases: setup, problem magnification, turning point, transformation, and resolution. Don't just list features and benefits. Don't rely on data alone. Tell a story where your prospect is the implied hero, your customer is the example, and your solution is the guide. Do that, and you'll see your close rate improve by 15 to 30% within the first quarter. That's not theory. That's measured, real-world data.
Here's what we want from listeners. Think about your last 3 closing conversations. Did you tell a structured customer story, or did you rely on features and ROI calculations? Try applying this 5-phase framework to your next closing call and let us know what happened.
And if you're a sales leader, share this episode with your team. These principles compound. When everyone on your team tells customer hero stories instead of company hero stories, your entire organization's close rate improves.
All right, here we go. Next episode, we're talking about something equally critical. Never stumble during Q&A again. The techniques that work. Ever been in a presentation where someone asked a question you weren't prepared for and you fumbled your way through an awkward answer? We're breaking down the exact techniques top presenters use to handle unexpected questions with confidence, the psychological frameworks that help you think on your feet, and the common mistakes that make you look unprepared even when you're not. If you've ever panicked during a Q&A session, this episode will transform how you handle tough questions.
Ooh, and I have to say, the frameworks we're sharing, absolute lifesavers. I wish I'd known these years ago. Would have saved me from so many sweaty palms moments.
Right? Once you have these techniques in your toolkit, those curveball questions become opportunities instead of traps.
Exactly. All right, everyone, that's a wrap for today. Go practice being curious and asking great questions.
It's been awesome having you with us.
Until next time, stay sharp and keep those answers ready.
We'll catch you on the flip side.
Happy presenting, everyone.
Business Essentials Podcast. Unlock your career.
Learn to speak business English like a pro.